All right, salutary neglect. Guys, this topic is one of my absolute favorites, and I love it because it has so much to do with kind of creating the country that we know, right? The attitude and the beliefs of the United States of America. It may also be one of the biggest blunders of the British Empire. This was a massive, massive mistake on their part. It wasn't intentional, but it certainly led to, I think, the revolution. So I'm going to explain how here just briefly. We have to understand that the British King Parliament, they're going to create a lot of trade restrictions. We saw that in the video on mercantilism. There's a lot of rules and regulations. A lot of rules and regulations about who they can trade with, what they can charge, what they have to pay, all sorts of different things, the types of industries that they can establish. Now, what we're going to see is that some of those things are going to be enforced, and we have to live under some of those, but some of them are not really regularly enforced. They're not very strictly enforced. And so that means that, as long as we adhere to a few of the basics, a lot of people are kind of left to their own devices to kind of live life, to figure out how to survive, how to thrive, how to make money, and just kind of live their lives without the interference of the government. What we're going to see is that the reason this happens is a couple of things come to mind. The idea that if it ain't broke, don't fix it. They didn't have problems in the American colonies. The British Empire had no problem with us. In fact, we were a cash cow. They were making money hand over fist, even without strictly regulating us, right? Even while turning their head the other way. And so we weren't causing problems. We weren't in open rebellion. We weren't struggling to generate revenue, right? Things were going really well. So if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Things are going just fine. The other thing that comes to mind is the idea that the squeaky wheel gets the grease, right? The British Empire is big, and they've got a lot of other colonies in a lot of other parts of the world, and some of those colonies are in open rebellion. Some of those colonies, they're having conflict with other foreign nations. And so those require more of their attention. As they are looking after those, as they're trying to build those up, as they're trying to build profits in other places, and American colonies are doing just fine, they kind of take a lax approach at enforcement here. It's not necessary, right? And so that's kind of what the idea of salutary neglect. Sometimes you'll hear it referred to as other things. Benign neglect is one of those. But this idea of salutary or benign neglect, it's going to be an unwritten policy. They didn't sit down and think about this intentionally. They didn't say, I think we should just leave the American colonies alone. No. It wasn't like that. It was inadvertent, right? It was because their attention was pulled elsewhere. And what we're going to see is that that policy lasted for about 150 years. Now think about it. None of us are going to see 150 years. That's multiple generations of people being born, growing to adulthood, living their lives, and then dying. And so 150 years is a long time, quite a few generations, especially at that time. I wonder what the effect, I wonder what the impact of that is going to be. Because what we're going to see is it really is the British Empire sowing the seeds of their own downfall. I don't mean the downfall of the entire British Empire, but the downfall of their control over the American colonies. Because in 150 years of being left alone, 150 years of being not tampered with or micromanaged and not having laws enforced, I'm guessing that multiple generations, each one more so than the previous, is going to begin to feel a little bit more independent, is going to feel a little bit more on their own, and they've done it without the help, and they've done it without the interference of the British crown. So they've built their life and they've done it kind of on their own. If you've done that, you don't want anybody else interfering. You don't want anybody kind of poking their head in and starting to mess around with your life. So the colonists are going to get really used to being left alone, and they're going to develop a big sense of independence. Right? That's just going to be the kind of the way things develop, and that plays an enormous part. In the end, what we'll see is that eventually salutary neglect is going to end. The policy itself didn't sow the seeds of their loss of control here in the colonies, but when they finally ended it and began to interfere a lot, then that kind of rubbed the colonists the wrong way. And you'll see that in several of the other videos, some of the specific ways that they interfered. The best way that I can explain this, if you've ever had a sibling, right? Maybe you've watched, maybe it's been you, right? But if you've had a sibling that goes off to college, and then they're there for a year and they come back, there's often a lot of tension in the house, right? Because that college student that goes away, they've spent a year taking care of themselves, going to class, trying to make the grades, doing their laundry, making sure, they're eating what they want, when they want, they're hanging out with who they want, they're doing all the things. And you know what? They're managing it just fine. And so they've lived an independent life for a year at college. Then they come home for the summer, and all of a sudden, mom and dad may not always see them as the independent person that the student believes they've become. All of a sudden, they have to adhere to the house rules. Mom and dad want to know where they're going and when they're going to be back, and why it's so late. And you have to adhere to the house rules while you're here. And so for college students that have been away for a little while and then come back, all of a sudden, that really rubs them the wrong way. That's after 1 year of being independent. Imagine the tension that would be caused if you were away for 150 years, doing your own thing, building your life, being successful, not being interfered with, and then all of a sudden, the parent, in this case England, starts to try to micromanage, tell you who you can hang out with, what you can do, all those sorts of things. It's going to cause some problems in the household. And so that's what we see in this idea of the end of salutary neglect is we've spent 150 years training ourselves to be independent, becoming successful. Now we don't want anybody messing with that. And so when the crown begins to, it's going to cause some serious problems. Guys, I hope that cleared up the idea of salutary neglect. It's not one that gets talked about a whole lot, but it forms the foundation because it shapes our attitudes, our ideas, our beliefs, and it really kind of sets us pretty firmly in this idea of non-government interference. We're fine on our own. We want to be left alone, right? And I think a lot of that is again, written into our DNA. So anyway, I hope you understand a little bit more about salutary or benign neglect. I hope it makes sense to you. I hope you can see the connections between that and the revolution, or those revolutionary ideas anyway. Go ahead and subscribe and watch some of the other videos, especially those that talk about the policies of the crown and how they began to interfere. Thanks for watching, guys. We'll see you next time.